Grant McCoy had buried one woman he loved. He had promised himself, on his knees in the mud beside her grave, he would never open that door again. Then he found her, slumped against a wagon wheel in the middle of a summer storm, dress torn at the shoulder, hair plastered to her face, a bruise the shape of a man's hand wrapped around her wrist. Not moving. He almost rode past. He didn't. And from that moment, nothing in Harlem Creek would ever be the same. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this ride takes us. The storm came in fast, the way summer storms always did in Harlem Creek. No warning, no mercy. Just a wall of black cloud rolling over the ridge and swallowing the sky whole. Grant McCoy had been watching it build for the better part of an hour from the seat of his wagon. He had Hope beside him, 8 years old and already asleep with her head against his arm, a sack of flour and 2 bolts of calico cloth behind them in the bed. He'd meant to be home before the rain. He hadn't made it. Lightning cracked somewhere over the eastern bluffs. The horses, a pair of gray geldings he'd owned for 6 years, threw their heads and snorted. Easy, he said. Low. Quiet. The voice he used when things needed settling. The rain hit a minute later. Not slow, not polite. A downpour. Sheets of it. Warm and violent. The kind that turned the road to mud in under a minute. Grant pulled his hat low and kept the horses moving. Another mile. Maybe less. He could see the fork in the road where the main trail split off toward his property, and beyond that, the dark shape of the ridgeline that meant home. That was when he saw the wagon. Pulled half off the road, listing to one side, one wheel deep in the soft shoulder. No horses hitched to it. No lantern, just a canvas-covered heap, and the outline of someone collapsed against the front wheel. Grant pulled up. He sat there for a moment, rain drumming the brim of his hat, water running off his oilskin in rivers. The figure didn't move. Hope stirred against his arm. "Papa?" "Stay here," he said. "Don't move." He climbed down and crossed the road in 3 strides. When he crouched beside the figure, he saw it was a woman. Dark hair, soaked through. Face turned into the mud. Her dress, gray, practical, the kind a ranch wife would wear, was torn at the collar. The sleeve was pushed up on her right arm, and even in the low light, he could see the bruising there. A whole hand's worth of it. He put 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse. Steady. Alive. He turned her onto her back, and she made a sound, something between a gasp and a whimper, and her eyes flew open. Dark eyes, wide with fear. She scrambled backward and hit the wheel, throwing both hands up. "Don't," she said, sharp, like a blade pulled fast. "I'm not going to hurt you," Grant said. He hadn't moved, kept his hands flat and open at his sides. "I'm Grant McCoy. I have a spread about a mile from here. I found you in the road." She stared at him, chest heaving, rain running down her face. "What happened to your horses?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "Gone." "Gone how?" "Taken." She said it like the word tasted like metal. Grant looked at the wagon, looked back at her. "You've got no way to move this. Road's going to flood inside the hour in this kind of rain." He paused. "You hurt anywhere besides that arm?" She pulled her sleeve down fast, too fast. "I'm fine," she said. "You were unconscious in a ditch." "I was resting." He almost smiled. Didn't. "All right." He pushed to his feet and looked down the road both directions. Empty. Not a light anywhere. Here's what I can offer you. My place is close. Dry. Got a spare room?" He looked at her straight. "My daughter's in the wagon, 8 years old. You can ride with us, and I'll come back for yours in the morning when the road's passable." She didn't answer right away. She was studying him the way someone studies a door they're not sure leads somewhere safe. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am, you don't." "And you don't know me." "No." A long beat passed between them. Thunder rolled low across the sky. "I'm Nora," she finally said. "Nora Hale." He extended a hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was firm. Her hand was cold. "Come on, then," he said. Hope was fully awake by the time Grant helped Nora up onto the wagon seat. The girl had her mother's eyes. Pale gray, thoughtful, the kind of eyes that took everything in and gave nothing back until they were ready. She looked at Nora for a long moment. Nora looked back. "You're wet," Hope said. "I am," Nora said. "Your hair's got mud in it." "Hope." Grant's voice was flat. "I'm just saying." But the girl shifted over to make room, pressed her small, warm side against Nora's cold one, without being asked. And that was that. The McCoy spread was small by some standards, generous by others. A 2-room house, solid, squared off, nothing fancy, with a barn behind it and a kitchen garden along the south wall. Grant had built most of it himself in the 2 years since Martha died. He'd built it the way men build things when they've got nowhere to put their grief. Hard and fast, and with their hands, until they couldn't feel anything but tired. He got them inside, got the horses settled, got a fire going in the iron stove. Nora stood near the door the whole time, like she hadn't decided yet whether to stay or bolt back into the rain. He put a dry shirt and a pair of his late wife's folded things on the table near her. He didn't say anything about where they'd come from. She didn't ask. Hope fell asleep before the kettle boiled, curled on the settle near the fire with her boots still on. Grant pulled them off for her and put a blanket over her without waking her. When he turned around, Nora was watching him from across the room. "She yours?" Nora asked. "All mine." He said it quiet. "Her mother?" "Gone. 2 years." Something moved across Nora's face. Not pity, more like recognition. The kind people have when they know a particular shape of loss, because they've carried a version of it themselves. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. Didn't need more than that. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one on the end of the table nearest to her. She came to it slowly, wrapped both hands around the cup, and stood there with the firelight on her face. He sat down across the room, gave her the distance she'd earned just by still being standing. It was Nora who spoke first. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "My name. It means something in the last town I came through." She set the cup down, looked at him directly. "A man died. My husband. People said I had something to do with it." Grant kept his face still. "Did you?" "No." No pause, no flinch. "He fell. He was drunk and angry, and he fell, and I couldn't catch him, and he died." She held his gaze. "But that's not how the story got told." "Who told it wrong?" "His brother, Warren Kent." She said the name the way people say the names of things that have followed them for a long time, quietly, like if she said it too loud, it might hear her. "He wants the land my husband left. My husband left it to me. Warren doesn't see it that way." Grant turned his coffee cup in his hands. Outside, the storm was still hammering the roof, but softer now, moving east. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "I don't know." She said it plainly, not ashamed. "Away." He nodded slowly. "You can stay the night," he said. "Longer than that, we'll talk about in the morning." She shook her head. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door." "Miss Hale." He set his cup down and looked at her. "My door's been knocked on by trouble plenty of times. It's still standing." She studied him for a moment. Something in her face, the tense, coiled set of it, eased just the smallest fraction. "All right," she said. "Thank you." Morning came clear. The storm had scrubbed everything clean, and the ridge beyond the pasture was sharp against a blue sky. Grant rode back out to her wagon before breakfast, assessed it, and came back with the news she'd already guessed. One axle cracked, the wheel nearly sheared off. It would take 2 days minimum to repair, assuming he could source the right iron from the smithy in town. He delivered this information from the doorway of the barn, hat in hand. Nora was at the kitchen table with Hope, who had apparently decided overnight to appoint herself Nora's official guide to everything on the property. "That's Papa's chair," Hope was explaining. "But you can sit in it. He doesn't care." "I do care," Grant said, coming inside. "He sits in it to think," Hope continued, ignoring him. "He thinks a lot. It's because he's sad." "Hope." "It's true." She looked at Nora very seriously. "Mama used to say he had too much going on upstairs." Nora glanced at Grant. There was something in the look, fast, private, gone before it could mean anything, that settled into his chest and stayed there. 2 days, he said, for the axle. You're welcome to stay until it's done. You've already done too much, Nora said. I haven't done anything yet. She opened her mouth to argue. He raised a hand, just slightly. It's not charity, he said. I've got fence to mend on the east side. If you want to earn your keep, you can cook while I'm out. Hope will show you where everything is. Hope sat up straight, like she'd been handed a title. I know where everything is, she said. I know you do, Grant said. He looked at Nora. She looked at him. Something practical passed between them. The silent language of people making reasonable arrangements. Nothing more than that. All right, she said. 2 days. The town of Harlan Creek got the news the way small towns always got news. Through Margaret Hale at the dry goods counter, who told Beth Summers, who told her husband Roy, who told anyone who'd stand still long enough. Grant McCoy had brought a woman home. By the time Grant rode in for the axle iron the next afternoon, the story had grown 3 limbs it hadn't started with. He was tying his horse outside the smithy when Carl Pruitt stepped off the boardwalk and blocked his path. Carl was a large man, the kind who had been big enough young that he'd never fully learned how to move around people instead of through them. Heard you got company, Carl said. Afternoon, Carl. Woman named Hale, they're saying. Grant looked at him. Iron's what I came for. 2-inch flat bar. Grant. Carl dropped his voice like he was doing something kind. You know who that woman is? Nora Hale, out of Redstone? Her husband died suspicious. Half the county thinks she did it. Half the county thinks a lot of things. This ain't a joke. Warren Kent's been through here twice in the last week looking for her. Man's got an eye like a storm cloud. And he's got papers. Says she stole property that belonged to his family before she ran. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then, get the iron for me, Carl. I'll pay full price. Carl stared at him. You're not gonna... Carl. His voice dropped flat and even. The iron. He was nearly back to the horses when he heard the second voice. Mr. McCoy. He turned. Ada Finch, 70 if she was a day, the woman who had run the Sunday school for longer than anyone could remember. She was standing at the edge of the walk, with her hands folded. "Ada," he said, "I hear you've taken in the Hale woman." She said it gentle, like she was breaking bad news. "I took in a woman whose wagon broke down in a storm," he said. "That's what happened." Ada pressed her lips together. "She's trouble, Grant. I don't say it mean, I say it true. That woman has a shadow behind her, and you've got a little girl at home." He looked at Ada for a moment, the lined face, the genuine concern in it. He respected Ada Finch. He wasn't about to lie to her. "I know what I'm doing," he said. "Do you?" She reached out and touched his arm, briefly, the way old women do when they're saying something they mean. "Your wife was my friend for 20 years. I don't want to see that child hurt." "She won't be," he said. He said it the way he'd said it once to a horse that had been badly handled, like a promise that didn't need explaining because the weight of it was plain enough. Ada watched him go. That evening, Nora had made biscuits. Grant didn't know how she'd found the Dutch oven, or the lard, or the dried herbs that Martha had put up 3 summers ago and that he'd never gotten around to throwing out. But they were on the table when he walked in, golden and hot, and Hope was sitting at her place with her hands folded like she was at church. "She taught me how to fold the dough," Hope said. "Did she?" Grant said. He set his hat on the peg, washed his hands at the basin, sat down. He looked at the biscuits. He looked at Nora, who had stationed herself near the stove, and was watching him with an expression that was carefully, deliberately neutral. "You don't have to stand over there," he said. "I'm fine." "Sit down, Miss Hale." A pause. Then she pulled out a chair, not the one Hope had indicated earlier as belonging to some unspoken category of important chairs, and sat. Hope reached for a biscuit immediately. Grant caught her wrist. "We say grace in this house," he said. Hope folded her hands. Grant bowed his head. The words came out short and plain, the way he'd always said them since Martha left. Stripped of ceremony, just the substance of them. "For this food, for this roof, for this child beside me. Amen." He didn't add anything new. He didn't have to. Something in the room shifted anyway. Hope looked at Nora. "You can say amen too," she said, "even if you're a guest." Nora smiled. It was the first real one Grant had seen from her, not the careful, guarded version she'd been managing since the road, and it changed her face completely, made her look younger, softer, more like herself, whoever that was. "Amen," she said. He found her on the porch after Hope was in bed. She was sitting on the step, looking out at the pasture in the last of the light. The sky had gone orange and rose at the edges, and the horses were standing quiet in the field. He sat down beside her, not close, the appropriate distance between two people who didn't know each other yet. "Carl Pruitt told me Warren Kent's been through Harlem Creek," he said. She didn't react, like she'd been waiting for it. "Twice," he added. "I know." Her voice was flat. "He's going to find you." "I know that too." A beat. "What are you going to do?" Grant asked. Nora was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "I was going to keep moving," she said. "Get far enough out that the name didn't reach first." She paused. "That was the plan." "Plans change," he said. She looked at him sidelong. "What are you saying?" He wasn't entirely sure. He looked out at the horses, at the ridge going dark against the sky, and tried to locate what it was he actually meant. "I'm saying a cracked axle takes 2 days," he said finally, "and nothing's got to be decided tonight." She studied his profile for a moment, long enough that he could feel it. "You barely know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "I could be exactly what they're saying." "You could be." Another pause. The first crickets started in the grass below the porch. "But you don't think so," she said. He turned and looked at her then, direct. The way he'd learned to look at people after Martha died, when he'd stopped having the patience for anything that wasn't the truth. "No," he said. "I don't." Nora held his gaze. Something moved in her eyes. Something that looked a lot like the feeling of a door opening that you'd given up expecting to open. She looked away first. "Thank you for the room," she said. "And the biscuits." She knew where the Dutch oven was. He almost smiled. Martha used to say anyone who couldn't find a Dutch oven in their own kitchen didn't deserve to have one. It was the first time he'd said her name out loud, without the weight of it flattening him. He noticed that. He didn't say it. They sat for a while longer, the two of them, in the warm evening air, not talking. Just two people on a porch, at the edge of a property that held more grief than most houses twice its size. Sitting in the particular quiet of people who have run out of defenses, and are not yet sure if that's something to be afraid of. Somewhere in the dark field, one of the horses stamped and blew. Hope's voice drifted through the wall, thin and drowsy, finishing a song she'd started singing herself to sleep. Grant and Nora both went still at the same moment, listening. Neither of them moved until it stopped. The second day started the way the first had ended, with an understanding between them that neither of them had put into words. Grant was up before dawn. He always was. It was one of the habits grief had handed him, the kind you didn't ask for and couldn't give back. The way the dark hours of early morning had become the only time the house felt manageable. Before Hope woke up and needed things, before the day started demanding pieces of him he wasn't always sure he had left to give. He was at the stove with his second cup of coffee when he heard the spare room door open. Nora came out dressed, hair already pinned back, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting the world to wait for her to be ready. She stopped when she saw him. "Didn't figure you for a late sleeper," he said. "Never have been." She crossed to the stove, found a cup without asking, poured herself coffee from the same pot. She leaned against the counter and looked at him. "You go to bed at all?" "Some." She looked like she didn't believe him. She didn't push it. They drank their coffee in the early dark, the two of them, the house quiet around them. And it wasn't until Hope came padding out in her nightgown 20 minutes later that either of them spoke again. "You're both up," Hope said, like she'd expected to find one of them gone. "We are," Grant said. Hope looked between them. Something in her expression, that particular 8-year-old calculation, turned satisfied. She climbed up into her chair and put her elbows on the table. "I want eggs," she said. "Good morning to you too," Grant said. "Good morning." She looked at Nora. "Do you know how to make eggs?" "I do," Nora said. "Papa burns them." "I don't burn them," Grant said. "The bottoms," Hope said seriously. "He burns the bottoms." Nora looked at Grant. He looked at his coffee. "The bottoms," she repeated. "Get your shoes on," he told Hope. "You've got chickens to check before breakfast." He spent the morning on the axle. It was slow work. The iron from Carl's smithy wasn't quite the right gauge, and he had to work it down at the forge he kept in the barn, which meant heat and sweat and the kind of focused frustration that kept a man from thinking about anything else. Which was, he'd found, exactly the kind of work he needed. He was 3 hours in when he heard the horses. Not his. His were in the pasture, and he knew their sounds the way he knew his own heartbeat. These were road horses, coming fast, and there were at least 2 of them. He set the hammer down and walked to the barn door. 2 riders, coming up his road at a canter, pulling up short in the yard. One of them Grant recognized, Roy Summers, who ran the feed store and fancied himself the informal conscience of Harlan Creek. The other was a man Grant had never seen before. tall, hard-faced, wearing a coat that was too heavy for the summer heat, like he wanted you to wonder what was underneath it. He had Warren Kent written all over him, even before he opened his mouth. "McCoy!" Roy called out. Grant walked out of the barn and stopped in the middle of the yard. He didn't go any closer. "Roy," he said, "you're a long way from your counter." "This is Deke Farrow," Roy said. He had the look of a man who had agreed to something and was already regretting it. "He's riding for Warren Kent. He's got some questions about—" "I can speak for myself," Deke said. His voice was flat and thin, the kind that carried without effort. He looked at Grant the way men look at things they've already decided about. "You've got a woman on your property, Nora Hale." Grant looked at him, said nothing. "We're not here for trouble," Deke said. "We're here for the woman. Mr. Kent has legal interest in her whereabouts. There are papers." "Show me the papers," Grant said. Deke reached into his coat. He produced a folded document and held it out. He didn't offer to bring it closer. Grant crossed the yard, took it, read it. The language was dense and official-looking, the kind of document someone had paid to have look more serious than it was. It claimed property rights, disputed inheritance, fraud. It had a judge's seal on it from a county Grant didn't recognize. "This isn't Harlan Creek jurisdiction," Grant said. He folded it and held it back out. "It's a territorial document. Jurisdiction's broad." "Then the territorial marshal can come serve it." Grant dropped it into Deke's hand. "You're a hired rider. That's not a badge." Deke looked down at him from the saddle with the patient expression of a man who was used to people making things harder than they needed to be. "Mr. Kent's going to come himself," Deke said. "Sooner or later. When he does, you don't want to be standing between him and what he's owed." "What he thinks he's owed," Grant said. A beat. "Get off my land," Grant said. Even. Quiet. The kind of quiet that meant it. Roy Summers looked pained. "Grant, I really think—" "You too, Roy." They left. Grant stood in the yard until the sound of their horses faded down the road. Then he turned around. Nora was standing at the corner of the house. She had heard all of it. Her face was the color of old chalk. Her hands were loose at her sides, not relaxed, just deliberately still, the way people hold themselves when they're working very hard not to show how afraid they are. "That was Deke Farrow," she said. "You know him?" "He's the one who took my horses." She said it without inflection, like a woman reporting a weather pattern. "He works for Warren. He does whatever Warren needs done." Grant looked at her. "What does Warren need done?" She met his eyes, and what he saw there was not the guarded, careful woman from the road, or the quiet one at the breakfast table. What he saw was someone who had been running for a long time and was very, very tired of it. "He needs me gone," she said. "Or dead. He's not particular." The word landed in the yard between them like a stone dropped into still water. "He'd kill you for the land," Grant said. "He'd kill me to be finished with it." She looked away. "The land is just the reason." Grant said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you been running?" "Since the day they put Daniel in the ground." She turned back to face him. 6 weeks? 7. I lost count somewhere in the middle." He studied her face, the hollows under her eyes, the set of her jaw, the particular worn-down look of someone who had not truly slept in a very long time. "Come inside," he said. "Grant, come inside, Miss Hale." He didn't say it hard. He said it the way he said things to Hope when she was scared and trying not to show it. "We'll figure the rest out inside." Hope was in the garden when they came back through the door, so it was just the two of them at the table. Nora sat with her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from, and Grant sat across from her, and he asked her to tell him everything. She did. It came out in pieces, not all in order, the way real things come out when someone finally decides to say them. Daniel Hale had been a weak man and a mean one, and Nora had known both of those things within a year of marrying him. But weakness and meanness weren't against the law, and in 1874, a woman in the territory didn't have a great many options for renegotiating the terms of her own life. She'd stayed. She'd worked the land alongside him and learned every inch of it, and loved it in the way you love the thing that sustains you, even when everything else is hard. Daniel's drinking had gotten worse the last 2 years. Warren had been circling longer than that, showing up at the property with reasons that were never quite the real reason, making offers on the land that got sharper-edged each time Daniel turned them down. "Daniel turned them down?" Grant asked. "When he was sober." Something complicated moved across her face. "When he was drunk, he'd threatened to take Warren's money and drink himself into the ground. Warren always knew to come when Daniel had been into the bottle." The night Daniel died, there had been a fight. Not unusual. But this one had ended differently. Daniel at the bottom of the porch steps, the back of his skull against a rock, and Nora standing above him in the dark with no one to say what had happened, except Warren, who had apparently been watching from the tree line and chose to say the worst possible version of it. "He was there?" Grant said. "He was there." Her voice went flat and cold. "He set it up. I believe that now. I didn't see it then because I was too busy being—" She stopped, drew a breath. "I was kneeling in the dirt next to a man I didn't love anymore, trying to keep him alive with my 2 hands, and by the time I understood what was happening, Warren had already told half the county his version." Grant was quiet. "The land went to me," she said. "It was in Daniel's will. Warren contested it before Daniel was in the ground. The judge in Redstone County, he's Warren's judge, everybody knows it, he froze the property. Said it couldn't be sold or transferred while the matter was under investigation." She pressed her lips together. "The investigation being whether I murdered my own husband." "Did you have a lawyer?" "For about 3 days, until Warren had a word with him." Grant sat back in his chair. He turned his coffee cup in his hands and looked at the table and thought about what it meant that a woman could have everything taken from her: her husband, her land, her name, her freedom, and still be sitting here talking about it in a level voice with her hands steady. "You're a strong woman," he said. It surprised her. He could see that, like she hadn't expected anything that straightforward. "I'm a tired woman," she said. "Same thing sometimes." She looked at him for a moment. Something shifted, not softened exactly, but opened, like a window that had been painted shut, getting unstuck for the first time in a long season. Then Hope came through the back door with a basket of eggs, and the moment folded back into itself. The axle was finished by late afternoon. Grant announced it at supper. Biscuits again, beans, the last of the bacon, and the word landed differently than he'd expected. He'd thought it would be a relief. He'd thought Nora would straighten up and start talking about early starts and road conditions. Instead, she went very still. Hope looked at her. "Does that mean you're leaving?" Nora opened her mouth. "No," Grant said. Both of them looked at him. He hadn't entirely planned to say it, but it was out now, and he found that he meant it, so he didn't take it back. "The axle's fixed," he said, "but Deke Farrow knows you were here. That road leads exactly one direction, and Warren Kent is somewhere on it." He looked at Nora. "If you leave now, you leave alone. With a repaired wagon and no horses worth trusting, and a man who wants you dead knowing which way you're pointed." Nora's jaw was tight. I can handle... You've been handling it for 7 weeks. He said it without judgment, just the plain weight of it. You don't have to keep handling it alone. The room was very quiet. Hope had stopped eating. You could stay, Hope said. She said it to Nora, very carefully, the way children say things they know are big. Papa has the spare room. It smells like old cedar, but it's not bad. Hope, Nora said softly. I'm just saying. The girl picked up her fork again. It smells fine. I put lavender in there this morning. Grant looked at his daughter. He felt something that he had no particular name for move through his chest. Something that felt like it hadn't been there in a very long time. He looked at Nora. 2 more days, he said. Let me ride to Dawson County. There's a circuit judge there I know. Man named Elias Pruitt. He's honest. I want to show him what's in those papers Deke Farrow was waving around. You don't owe me that, she said. No, he agreed. I don't. She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were dark and direct, and full of something she wasn't saying. Why? She asked. He thought about it. Really thought about it. The way he'd stopped doing with most things. Because thinking too hard about them led back to places he'd been avoiding. Because what they're doing to you isn't right, he said. And I've got a little girl watching me decide what to do about it. Nora looked at Hope. Hope was watching her plate with an expression of intense concentration that did not fool anyone. 2 days, Nora said finally. 2 days, he confirmed. He was in the barn that night when he heard the second set of riders. This time, there were 4 of them. He came out of the barn fast, hand already at his hip, and pulled up short when he saw it wasn't Deke Farrow. It was Carl Pruitt and Roy Summers again, and 2 other men from town. Ben Alcott, who ran the mill, and a younger man Grant didn't recognize. Carl looked uncomfortable. He always looked uncomfortable when he'd been pushed into something he hadn't started. Grant, he said, we need to talk. You just talked to me this morning. That was different. That was Farrow's business. Carl dismounted. The others stayed on their horses, which told Grant something about the nature of the conversation they'd come to have. This is the town's business. The town's, Grant said. Nora Hale being on your property is drawing attention. Deke Farrow's been in and out of the saloon all afternoon. He's been talking. Carl's voice dropped. Saying things about what she is. What she did. People are listening, Grant. Not because they want to. Because he's saying it loud enough that they don't have a choice. Grant looked at him. What exactly is he saying? Carl hesitated. Say it. That she bewitched you. Carl looked miserable saying it. That she's done it before. That Daniel Hale wasn't the first man she... Stop. Grant's voice cut flat across the yard. Carl stopped. I want you to hear me, Grant said, because I'm only going to say this once. He looked at Carl, then at Roy, then at the 2 on horseback. Nora Hale is a guest on my property. She has done nothing wrong. What happened to her husband was an accident, and Warren Kent is using a hired liar to slander her name because he wants her land. He paused. Anyone in Harlan Creek who wants to believe a man like Deke Farrow over what they know about me is welcome to do that. But they should know where I stand first. Roy cleared his throat. Grant, we're just trying to... I know what you're trying to do. He wasn't angry. That was the thing that made it land harder than anger would have. He was just certain. You're trying to protect your own quiet. I understand that. But I'm not going to run a woman off my property because she makes the town uncomfortable. The young man on horseback, the one Grant didn't know, leaned forward in his saddle. She's a murderer. The yard went still. Grant looked at him. "Who are you?" Grant asked. The young man straightened up. "Tom Alcott, Ben's nephew." "You ever met Nora Hale, Tom?" A beat. "No." "Talked to her? Heard her side?" You heard Deke Farrow," Grant said. "A hired man. In a saloon. That's not testimony. That's not evidence. That's not even courtesy." He held the young man's gaze. "Don't come back to this property with someone else's words in your mouth." Tom Alcott looked at the ground. Carl mounted up slowly. He looked at Grant with an expression that was complicated. Part concern, part something that might have been respect, part the look of a man who knows he's in the middle of something bigger than he bargained for. "Warren Kent himself is due in Harlan Creek by the end of the week," Carl said. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning from someone who still, underneath everything, considered himself Grant's friend. "I just want you to know that." "I appreciate it," Grant said. He waited until they were down the road and out of earshot. Then he stood in the yard for a moment in the dark, and the weight of what was coming settled on him the way weather settles, not all at once, but unmistakably and without apology. He went back inside. Nora was at the kitchen window. She had heard. He knew she had heard, and she knew he knew, and neither of them pretended otherwise. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." "You just made this harder for yourself." "Probably." He pulled off his hat and set it on the peg, ran a hand through his hair. "Doesn't change anything." She turned from the window and looked at him, and there was something fierce in her face. Not grateful, exactly, because gratitude was too soft a word for it. Something more like the expression of a person who has had the thing they stopped believing in walk back through the door. "Grant," she said. He looked at her. "Warren Kent is not a man who stops," she said. "He will come here, and when he does, he won't come alone, and he won't come to talk." "I know." "He will hurt you to get to me." "I know that too." "Then why, Nora?" He said her name for the first time without the formal hedge of it, without the miss in front of it, and she went quiet the instant he did. "I've been keeping my head down in this county for 2 years, working my land, raising my daughter, staying out of everything that wasn't my business, because that's what a man does when he's trying to survive something." He looked at her directly. "But at some point, surviving isn't enough. At some point, a man has to decide what he's actually for." She stared at him. Behind them, in the spare room, Hope had started singing again. The same half-remembered song, quiet and thin, the words blurred with the edge of sleep. Grant and Nora stood in the kitchen without moving, both of them listening to it, and the air between them was dense with everything that hadn't been said yet, and wouldn't be said tonight. All the things that were still too new and too dangerous to speak aloud, when the week ahead was already loaded with enough that could go wrong. But she didn't look away, and he didn't move back. And somewhere in the distance, down the road that led from Harlan Creek toward the east, a horse was moving through the dark at a pace that meant someone was coming, and coming fast, and wasn't planning on stopping until they arrived. The horse Grant had heard in the distance didn't stop at his property that night, but it might as well have. He was up at first light, and the news reached him before his coffee was cold. Ada Finch's boy knocked on the door just after sunrise, breathless and barefoot, with the look of a child who'd been sent on an errand he didn't fully understand. "Mrs. Finch says to tell you," the boy panted, "that Warren Kent rode into Harlan Creek last night. Took the room above the saloon. And he's got 5 men with him." Grant looked at the boy. 5. "Yes, sir, maybe 6. Deke Farrow and some others she didn't recognize." The boy swallowed. "She says he's calling a town meeting for this afternoon, at the courthouse. She says he's going to make it official." Make what official? The charges. The boy looked miserable. Against the woman. Grant reached into his pocket, pressed a coin into the boy's hand, and sent him home. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The morning was already warm, the kind of thick summer heat that settled in early and didn't let go. Down the hall, he could hear Nora moving in the spare room, the sound of a drawer, the soft step of boots on the board floor. He went to the kitchen and poured her coffee without being asked. She came out 2 minutes later, already dressed, already reading his face. "What happened?" she said. "Warren's here." She stopped moving. "He got in last night," Grant said. "He's called a town meeting for this afternoon." Nora set her hand flat on the back of a chair, not gripping it, just resting there, the way people brace themselves when they need to and don't want anyone to see them do it. "What kind of meeting?" she asked. "The kind where a man with money and lawyers stands up in front of people who are tired and scared and makes them feel like they're doing the right thing by going along with him." She was quiet for a moment. "He's going to push for my arrest." "Most likely." "The sheriff here, Tanner. He's a good man, but he follows the county's lead." She looked at Grant. "If Warren brings that territorial document and his judge's name, Tanner won't have a choice." "He might have more of a choice than Warren thinks," Grant said. "If the right people stand up first." Nora looked at him. "You're going to the meeting?" "Yes." "Grant, he doesn't get to walk into my town and call a woman a murderer without someone answering him." His voice was even and absolutely fixed. "That's not how this works." "Your town," she said softly. "I've lived here 11 years. He looked at her. "I've buried a wife here. I've raised a daughter here. Yes, my town." Something moved across her face. She picked up the coffee he'd poured and drank it, and didn't say anything else about the meeting for a while. Hope knew something was wrong, the way children always know. Not through facts, but through the particular quality of the silence between adults. She ate her breakfast without her usual commentary, watching Grant over the rim of her cup with those pale gray eyes that missed nothing. When Grant stood to go, she grabbed his sleeve. "Are you coming back before dark?" she asked. "Way before dark," he said. She held on for another second. "Promise?" He looked at her. He didn't make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. She knew that. He'd taught her that. "I'll do everything I can," he said. She let go. Nora was standing at the window when he turned around. She had been watching the exchange with an expression that was very quiet and very careful. The kind of expression people wear when something is getting past their defenses and they haven't fully decided how to feel about that. "I'll stay with her," Nora said. "I know you will." He picked up his hat. "Lock the door until I'm back. Don't open it for anyone you don't know." "Grant." Her voice caught him at the door. He turned. "Don't do anything that can't be undone," she said. He put his hat on. "Can't promise that either," he said. And he walked out. The courthouse in Harlan Creek was a single room, with a raised platform at one end and benches enough for about 40 people if they sat close. By the time Grant arrived, every bench was full, and people were standing along the walls, 3 deep. Half the town, maybe more. He pushed through the door and felt the room shift when people saw him. Heads turned, elbows moved, whispers spread out from him like ripples in still water. He found a spot along the side wall and stood with his arms crossed and waited. Warren Kent was already at the front. Grant had expected someone large. Warren Kent was not large. He was medium height, spare, neatly dressed in clothes that cost more than any man in this room earned in a month. He had the careful, composed look of a man who had spent a long time learning how to make people feel like agreeing with him was their own idea. Gray at the temples, smooth hands, eyes that were dark and quiet, and missed nothing. Deke Farrow stood 2 steps behind him, like a shadow with boots on. Sheriff Tanner sat at the desk on the platform. He was a decent man. Grant knew that, had always known it, but he had the look of a man who'd been told this meeting was a formality, and was beginning to suspect that wasn't quite right. Warren Kent began to speak. He was good at it. Grant had to give him that. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He laid things out the way a man lays out cards, slowly, carefully, one at a time, each one seeming reasonable until you looked at the whole hand. He talked about Daniel Hale, about the property, about the night his brother died. He used words like tragedy and grief and justice, and he said them in a voice that sounded like he meant every one of them, and several people in the room were nodding before he'd been talking 5 minutes. "My brother's wife," Warren said, "has fled the county where this matter is under investigation. She has evaded lawful inquiry. She is currently residing, as many of you are aware, on a private property in this very township." He looked around the room. "I am not here to cause trouble for anyone in Harlan Creek. I am here because I believe in the law, and the law requires—" "The law requires evidence," Grant said. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when a voice comes from somewhere unexpected. Warren turned and looked at him. The dark, quiet eyes found him without hurry, the way a man looks at something he's already cataloged and set a price on. "Mr. McCoy," he said, smooth, like he'd been expecting this. "You've been talking for 5 minutes," Grant said, moving away from the wall, "and I've heard a lot of words. I haven't heard one piece of evidence that Nora Hale did anything except lose her husband and have the misfortune of being related to you by marriage." A murmur ran through the room. "Mr. McCoy," Sheriff Tanner leaned forward. "This is an orderly proceeding." "Is it?" Grant looked at Tanner directly. "Because an orderly proceeding has 2 sides. I've heard one. Who's speaking for Mrs. Hale?" Silence. "She's not here," someone said from the benches. "No," Grant said, "she's not, because she wasn't invited. Because this wasn't called as a hearing. It was called as a verdict." He looked back at Warren. "Which tells me something about what kind of justice we're actually talking about." Warren Kent's expression didn't change. If anything, it got more composed, more patient, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Mr. McCoy," Warren said, "I understand you've extended hospitality to my sister-in-law. That speaks well of you. But hospitality doesn't change what the record shows." "What record?" Grant walked toward the front of the room. People moved back on either side without him asking them to. "The record kept by a judge in your county who everyone here knows has your name in his pocket? That record?" A sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the benches. Warren's composure held, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly, just enough for Grant to see it. A recalibration, the adjustment of a man who had underestimated something. "You're making a serious accusation," Warren said quietly. "You made yours against a woman who wasn't here to defend herself," Grant said. "I'm just balancing the room." Roy Summers stood up from the second bench. Grant looked at him. Roy looked back. The expression on Roy's face was the agonized look of a man being asked to pick a side in something he'd hoped would resolve itself without him. "Grant," Roy said carefully, "nobody here wants to see Mrs. Hale treated unjust. But there's a legal matter at issue. We can't just—" "The legal matter is a document from a compromised court," Grant said. He turned to the room, not to Roy, to all of them. "I want every man and woman in this room to ask themselves one thing. One thing." He let the room go quiet. "How many of you have met Nora Hale?" talked to her, looked her in the eye. No hands. How many of you are about to vote to hand her over to a man you met this morning, based on a story you heard from a hired rider in a saloon? The silence was different now, heavier. Carl Pruitt, in the back, shifted in his seat. He did not meet Grant's eyes. Ben Alcott looked at the floor. Tom Alcott, the young nephew, had gone slightly red. Warren Kent stepped forward. His voice was still even, but it had a new edge under it. The edge of a man who knows he's losing the room and is deciding how to take it back. "I have legal documentation," Warren said. "I have a letter from the territorial court. Sheriff Tanner has an obligation to the law," Tanner said from the desk. Everyone looked at him. Tanner had the look of a man who had finally made up his mind about something. He sat up straight and folded his hands on the desk and looked at Warren Kent with the patient, slightly tired expression of a man who had been doing a difficult job for a long time. "Mr. Kent," Tanner said, "I've read your document. I've also had a wire this morning from Judge Elias Pruitt over in Dawson County, who informs me that the seal on your territorial document is from a court currently under inquiry for procedural violations." He paused. "Which means its jurisdiction in my county is, at minimum, questionable." The room erupted. Warren Kent's composure broke for exactly 3 seconds. Just 3. But Grant saw it, and it was enough. "That wire," Warren started. "Came this morning," Tanner said, "before you spoke." He looked at Grant briefly. Just briefly. "I believe someone sent Judge Pruitt a copy of your documents last night." Grant kept his face even. He had ridden to the telegraph office at 4 in the morning. He had not mentioned it to anyone. "This is obstruction," Warren said. His voice had lost its smooth finish. Underneath it was something older and uglier. "This is interference with a lawful—" "This is Harlan Creek," Tanner said. "And until I receive documentation from a court whose authority I recognize, there will be no arrest warrant issued for Nora Hale in this township." He stood up. Meetings over. Warren Kent didn't leave. That was the first sign. A man who had lost the room would leave, regroup, recalculate, come back with something sharper. Warren stayed at the front of the courthouse after people filed out. He stood there with Deke Farrow at his shoulder and watched Grant walk toward the door with an expression that was absolutely still and absolutely cold, and told Grant everything about what was coming next. Carl caught Grant's arm just outside. "You did something tonight that man won't forgive," Carl said, low and urgent. "I know." "Grant, he's not just going to go home. He's going to—" "I know, Carl." Carl looked at him for a moment with genuine anguish. "Was it worth it?" Grant looked back at the courthouse door. Through the window in it, he could see Warren Kent still standing at the front of the room, not moving, looking at nothing. "Ask me again in a week," Grant said. He went to his horse. He was halfway home when he heard the gunshot, single, sharp, from the direction of his property. He put his heels into the horse before the sound had fully faded. The ride home was the longest half-mile of his life. Everything in him that he had spent 2 years learning to keep locked down came loose at once. Every fear he'd put in the ground next to Martha, every careful wall he'd built between feeling things and surviving them. Hope. The word kept hitting the inside of his chest like a fist. Hope. Nora. He came over the ridge at a full gallop and pulled up so hard the horse sat back on its haunches. The yard was empty. Front door, standing open. He was off the horse and across the yard in seconds, hand on his gun before he hit the porch, and through the door, and— Hope was standing on the kitchen table. Not hurt, standing, arms crossed, with an expression of profound outrage on her 8-year-old face that he recognized immediately as his own expression reflected back at him. Nora was against the far wall with a shotgun. His shotgun, the one he kept above the doorframe, broken open and empty in her hands. She was breathing hard. There was mud on her sleeve. On the floor, clutching his hand to his chest, was a man Grant had never seen before. He had the rough look of a hired rider. He also had a cut above his eye and a goose egg on his jaw, and the general appearance of someone who had encountered more resistance than he'd planned for. Grant stood in the doorway and looked at the scene in front of him. "What," he said, "happened?" "He came over the fence from the east side," Nora said. Her voice was level, but her hands on the shotgun weren't quite still. "He didn't knock." "I got him with the rolling pin," Hope announced from the table. Grant looked at his daughter. "The rolling pin," he said. "First," Hope said. "Then Miss Nora got the gun." She considered this. "He yelled quite a lot." The man on the floor looked up at Grant with the expression of a man who had not anticipated this particular sequence of events. "Don't," Grant said. He crouched down in front of the man, looked at him for a moment. "You ride for Warren Kent?" he asked. A pause, then a nod. "He sends you to scout the property?" Another nod, smaller this time. "Or," Grant said very quietly, "did he send you for something else?" The man's eyes cut sideways toward Nora and then back, fast, like he hadn't meant to do it. Grant stood up. Something cold moved through him. Not anger, which was hot and quick. Something slower, more deliberate. "Get up," he said. The man got up. "Get on your horse," Grant said. "Ride back to Warren Kent, and tell him this." He waited until the man was looking at him directly. "Tell him that the next person he sends onto my property without an invitation is going to leave it in a condition he won't find useful. Tell him I said that. Those exact words." The man left fast. Grant stood in the doorway and watched him go. Then he turned back into the kitchen. Hope climbed down off the table. "I wasn't scared," she announced. "I know," Grant said. He crossed the room in 2 strides, crouched down, and pulled her against him. Hard. The way you hold something when you've just understood what it would mean to lose it. She patted his back with both hands, resigned and practical. "Papa," she said, "I can't breathe." He let go, looked at her face. She was fine. She was perfectly fine. He stood up and looked at Nora. She was still holding the shotgun. Her face was composed in the way it got when she was managing something that wanted to break through. But her eyes were the eyes of a woman who had stood in a kitchen alone with a man coming through her door before, and who had gotten through it, and who was now very, very tired of having to. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He crossed to her and took the shotgun from her hands gently. She let him take it. Her fingers had been white on the stock, and when she let it go, she closed her hands into fists at her sides. He set the gun on the table. He stood in front of her and didn't move and didn't speak for a moment. "He was already inside when I heard him," she said. Her voice had gone quieter. "He wasn't trying to be subtle. He knew what he came for." "I know," Grant said. Hope was upstairs. Her jaw tightened. "I wasn't going to—" "I know." He said it again, and this time he put everything he meant into it. All of it. Every bit of the weight of what she'd done and what it had cost her to do it. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then something broke open behind her eyes. Just briefly. Just a crack. Just enough. and she looked down at her own hands, still clenched. "He's not going to stop," she said. "Not with a judge's letter. Not with Tanner. Not with you standing up in a courthouse." She looked up at him. "Warren Kent does not stop." "No," Grant agreed. "He doesn't." "Then what do we do?" He picked up his hat from the table where he'd dropped it. He stood in the kitchen of his house, the house he'd built, the house where his daughter sang herself to sleep, the house that smelled like cedar and old lavender and biscuits. And he looked at Nora Hale and understood that the answer he was about to give was going to change something between them that couldn't be changed back. "We stop running," he said. "We stop waiting for him to make the next move, and we take this to a court he hasn't bought. We get Elias Pruitt. We get every piece of evidence you have about Daniel's death. We get witnesses from Redstone County if we have to ride there ourselves and drag them here." He looked at her directly. "And we fight it. In the open, in front of people." His voice was quiet and absolute. "We make it so loud that Warren Kent can't make it go away quietly." Nora stared at him. "You'd do that," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a woman who had spent 7 weeks alone, trying to understand something she had stopped believing was possible. "I'd do that," he said. Hope appeared at his elbow. She had somehow acquired the rolling pin again. She held it up. "I'll help," she said. Something broke across Nora's face then. Not tears, not collapse, nothing soft. It was more like the expression of a person watching the door they've been pushing against alone for a very long time begin, very slowly, to move. She pressed her lips together hard, looked at Hope, looked at Grant. "Okay," she said. Just that. One word. But the way she said it, with the full weight of someone who has finally, after everything, chosen to trust. It landed in the room like the first stone set in a foundation. "Okay," Grant said. Outside, somewhere down the Harlan Creek Road, the dust that Warren Kent's man had kicked up was still settling. And from the direction of town, faint and far, the sound of horses moving. More than two. Grant heard it. Nora heard it. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and the same understanding passed between them at the same instant. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The horses didn't stop at the gate. Grant was already moving toward the door when they turned into the yard. 4 riders, and at the front of them, Warren Kent himself. Not Deke Farrow this time. Not hired men sent ahead. Warren, in person, in the last of the evening light, riding like a man who had already decided how tonight was going to end. Grant stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind him. He didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. He stood with his hands loose at his sides and let Warren Kent ride all the way into his yard and pull up 10 feet from his porch steps before he said a word. "Mr. Kent," he said. Warren dismounted. He handed his reins to Deke without looking at him. He walked to the foot of the steps and stopped and looked up at Grant with those flat, dark, patient eyes. "Mr. McCoy," he said, "I think it's time you and I had a real conversation." "We could have had one at the courthouse," Grant said. "You had your chance." The courthouse was theater. Warren said it plainly, like it was a fact they both understood. "This is business." He glanced at the door behind Grant. "I'd like to speak with my sister-in-law." "She's not available." "She's on your property." He tilted his head slightly. "Which means you're standing between me and a woman who is subject to a legal proceeding, whether Sheriff Tanner finds it convenient or not." "That legal proceeding," Grant said, "is attached to a court that's currently under inquiry. Judge Pruitt's wire this morning made that clear enough." Something moved in Warren's face. Not surprise, he'd known about the wire. Anger then, the real kind, under the composed surface. The kind that had been building for a long time. "You wired Pruitt at 4 in the morning," Warren said. "I did." "You've never met Nora Hale in your life until 3 days ago." "Correct." Warren looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more direct. The performance was gone. "What exactly do you think you're protecting?" he asked. "You don't know what she is. You don't know what she did." "I know what you did," Grant said. "You stood in the dark outside your brother's house and watched him die. And then you opened your mouth and told it wrong. And I think you've been telling it wrong so long, you've started believing your own version of it." The yard was absolutely still. Deke Farrow shifted in his saddle. Warren Kent looked at Grant, and the mask was completely gone now, and what was underneath it was old and mean and hungry, and had been all of those things for a very long time. "Step aside," Warren said. "No," Grant said. One word. Flat. The way he'd said it to Hope when she was 2 years old and headed for the fire. The way he'd said it to a man in a bar in Dawson County 5 years ago who had needed to hear it. The word that didn't argue, didn't negotiate, didn't leave room for anything except itself. Warren looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then he smiled. It was the worst kind of smile. Patient, cold, and completely certain. "All right," he said. He turned back to his horse. "All right, Mr. McCoy." He mounted up slowly. "I'll respect your property tonight." He gathered his reins. "But understand something. I have been in this territory for 22 years. I've outlasted better men than you, and I am not leaving this county without what belongs to me." He turned his horse. "What belongs to you?" Grant said. Warren looked back over his shoulder. "She has a deed," Grant said. "In her name. That land belongs to Nora Hale, and it has since the day your brother put his name on a piece of paper and signed it. The only thing you've got is a crooked judge and a hired writer and a story you tell people who don't ask enough questions." He held Warren's gaze. "I'm asking questions." Warren rode out of the yard without another word. Deke Farrow was last. He looked at Grant as he passed. Not angry, not threatening. Something almost like professional acknowledgement. The look of a man who understood that things had just gotten significantly more complicated. Then they were gone. Grant stood on the porch until he couldn't hear the horses anymore. Then he let out the breath he'd been holding since they rode in and sat down on the top step and put his head in his hands for about 10 seconds. The door opened behind him. Nora sat down beside him on the step. Not close. The same measured distance she always kept. "I heard," she said. "I know." "He's not going to stop." "I know that too." He lifted his head. "He mentioned a deed. You have it?" She hesitated. Just a moment. "It's in the wagon, in the false bottom of the supply box." He looked at her. "You've been carrying it this whole time." "I wasn't going to leave it." She said it like the idea was obvious. "It's the only thing I have that's actually mine." He stood up. "Get it." The deed was real. Grant spread it on the kitchen table, under the lamp, and read every line of it twice. Daniel Hale's signature at the bottom, witnessed by 2 names he didn't recognize. Nora's name on the title line. The property description. 80 acres in Redstone County, water rights included. It was solid, legal, clear. He sat back and looked at it. "This wins," he said. "In a real court, with a real judge, This wins outright." "I know that," Nora said. She was standing on the other side of the table. "That's why Warren needs me to not be alive to present it." Hope, who had been sitting in the corner pretending to do needlework and actually listening to every word, looked up sharply at that. Grant looked at his daughter. "Go to bed, Hope." "I'm not tired." "Go to bed." She put down the needlework and looked at Nora with an expression that was very serious and very 8 years old, and absolutely impossible to argue with. "He's not going to let anything happen to you," Hope said. "He doesn't let bad things happen to people he cares about." "Hope," Grant said. "It's true." She got up and walked to her room and shut the door. And from the other side of it, within about 30 seconds, she started singing, that same half-song, thin and quiet, that had become the sound of evenings in this house. Nora looked at the closed door. She pressed her lips together, hard. "She's something," she said softly. "She's everything," Grant said. And then, because it was the truth, and the evening had already stripped most of his defenses anyway, he left it sitting there, in the open, instead of taking it back. Nora looked at him. He looked at the deed. "I'm going to Dawson County tomorrow," he said. "First light. I'll take this to Elias Pruitt personally. He'll know what to do with it." "That's a day's ride." "I'll be back by nightfall, if I push. And if Warren makes a move while you're gone?" He folded the deed carefully and set it in the middle of the table. "Ada Finch," he said. "She's 2 properties down the road. Her boys are grown, and they're good men. I'll ask her to send them over." Nora was quiet for a moment. "You trust Ada Finch? She was the one warning you away from me 3 days ago." "She was worried about Hope." He looked up. "That's different from being Warren Kent's ally. Ada Finch has got a strong sense of right. She just needed to know where the right was." He paused. "She knows now. She sent her boy with that warning this morning because she wanted me ahead of it." Nora took that in slowly, like someone recalibrating a map they'd been reading wrong. "I've been alone so long," she said. "I've forgotten what it looks like when people are actually trying to help." He said nothing, just let it sit. "Looks different than I remembered," she said quietly. He left before dawn. He didn't wake Nora. He left a note on the kitchen table, 3 lines, plain as everything he said, and saddled his best horse in the dark and rode for Dawson County, with the deed in his inside coat pocket, and the particular focused calm of a man who has finally stopped waiting and started moving. Ada Finch's lamp was already lit when he passed. He stopped long enough to knock, explain, and watch Ada's face go through 3 different calculations before she nodded and said she'd have her boys at his gate by sunup. He believed her. He rode on. The road to Dawson County ran east through open country, flat, hot, dry in the summer, the kind of landscape that made a man feel both very small and very clear about things. Grant rode with his hat pulled low and his mind running ahead of him, through everything that needed to happen and in what order. Elias Pruitt was a circuit judge who had been riding this territory for 15 years. He was not a young man. He was not a warm man. But he was scrupulously, almost combatively honest, which in this territory was rarer than water in August and considerably more valuable. He was also the reason Warren Kent had never managed to extend his reach into Dawson County. Grant arrived at the judge's house at 10:30 in the morning. He tied his horse, knocked, and was met at the door by Pruitt himself, a lean gray man in suspenders, who looked at Grant with the expression of someone who did not appreciate being knocked on before noon, but who would hear him out anyway because that was the job. Grant presented the deed. He presented the document Warren had tried to serve. He presented what Nora had told him about Daniel's death, about Warren's presence that night, about the judge in Redstone County and the frozen property and the 7 weeks of running. Pruitt listened without interrupting. When Grant finished, the judge turned the deed over in his hands and looked at it for a long time without speaking. "The Redstone court seal on that document is from Judge Carver's docket," Pruitt said finally. "Yes, sir. Carver's under federal inquiry for 3 counts of procedural misconduct." Pruitt set the document down. "His warrants and orders have been suspended pending review, which means the freeze on Mrs. Hale's property has no current legal standing." Grant felt something loosen in his chest. "What about the murder accusation?" he asked. "An accusation made by one witness, the deceased's brother, who stands to inherit should Mrs. Hale be found guilty, with no corroborating evidence and no inquest formally filed." Pruitt looked at him. "In my court, that's not a case. That's a family dispute with ambitions above its station." "Can you say that officially?" "I can do considerably more than say it." The judge stood up. "I can ride to Harlan Creek tomorrow morning with a formal order vacating Carver's documents and the letter to Sheriff Tanner clarifying his jurisdiction in this matter." He paused. "And I can subpoena Warren Kent to appear before my court to answer questions about the night his brother died and the subsequent actions he took to dispossess the widow." Grant stared at him. "You'd do that," he said. "Mrs. Hale is a citizen of this territory." Pruitt's voice was dry and absolute. "She is entitled to the same protection of law as anyone else in it. The fact that she has not received it is an embarrassment to this office." He picked up his hat. "Now get off my porch, Mr. McCoy. I have paperwork to prepare." He made it back to Harlan Creek by late afternoon. He knew something was wrong before he hit the gate. Ada Finch's older boy, James, was in the road on horseback, and the look on his face when he saw Grant coming was the look of a man who has been holding something bad and is very relieved to hand it off. Grant pulled up. "What happened?" "Warren Kent's men," James said. 3 of them. They came about 2 hours ago. Not to the house. They set up at the far end of your east fence. Just watching." "Just watching," Grant repeated. "Yes, sir. Didn't come any closer. But—" James hesitated. "Miss Hale saw them from the window. She went out." Grant went very still. "She went out." "To the fence line." James looked pained. "She walked out to the fence line by herself, and she stood there and she looked at them. Just looked. For about 5 minutes. Then she walked back inside." He shook his head slowly. "2 of them actually backed their horses up. I don't know how to explain it, except that's what happened." Grant looked at the road ahead. "And Warren Kent himself?" he asked. "In town, at the saloon. He's been there all day." James paused. "He had a conversation with Sheriff Tanner about an hour ago. I don't know what was said." Grant nodded. "Go home, James. Tell your mother thank you." He rode the rest of the way in fast. Nora was at the kitchen table when he came through the door. She had a cup of coffee and a small, leather-bound book open in front of her that she closed when she saw him. Her face was composed and alert, and she looked at him the way she always looked at him when she was reading his expression for information before he spoke. He sat down across from her. "Judge Pruitt's coming tomorrow," he said. She didn't react immediately. She took it in slowly, her hands flat on the table. "He's vacating Warren's documents," Grant continued. "The Carver court is suspended. The property freeze has no legal standing." He held her gaze. "Nora, the land is yours. It's been yours this whole time. Warren never had the law on his side. He just had the right judge in the right pocket." She looked at him for a long time. He watched her face work through it. The disbelief first, Then the slow, careful dismantling of the disbelief. Then something raw and unguarded underneath both of those things. "It's mine," she said, like she was testing the weight of the words. "It's yours." Her jaw tightened. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a moment, one moment, and then she put her hand back on the table and sat up straight and blinked twice and was composed again. "He's still going to fight it," she said. "He's going to try. Pruitt subpoenas him, he'll lawyer up. He has the money for it. He'll drag it out for months." "Maybe," Grant said. "But Pruitt is also opening an inquiry into Daniel's death, independent of the Carver court, based on new testimony." He paused. "Your testimony." She went still. "I told him what you told me," he said. "He wants to take a formal statement. He wants to know about Warren being at the property that night. He wants to know about the timeline." He kept his voice level and steady. "Nora, you've been running from this for 7 weeks. Pruitt is offering you the chance to stop running and turn around." She stood up from the table. She crossed to the window and stood there with her back to him and her arms crossed over her chest. And he watched the tension in her shoulders and understood what it meant. Not reluctance, not fear, but the particular tightening of someone who has been carrying something alone for so long that being offered help feels almost like a threat. "If I give testimony," she said, "Warren will know exactly where I am and what I'm saying. There's no taking it back." "No," he agreed. "There isn't." "If his lawyers discredit me, they'll try. If this goes wrong—" "Nora." He stood up. He crossed to her, not fast, not sudden, and stopped a few feet behind her. "I know. I know every way this could go wrong. I've been turning it over since before I rode out this morning." He paused. "But I also know that you have been alone in this for 7 weeks, and you've survived because you're strong enough to survive. And you could keep surviving alone. You could take that deed and go somewhere new and start over, and maybe Warren never finds you." He stopped. Let the silence hold for a second. "Or you could stay and fight and end it." She turned around. She was close. Closer than she'd been in the kitchen before. Close enough that he could see the fine line of tension around her eyes, the slight tremor in her jaw that she was working to control. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. Not accusatory, genuine. The question of a woman who has run out of ways to explain something that keeps happening. He thought about telling her the practical version, the justice of it, the principle of it, the thing about Hope watching him decide what he was for. He'd said all of that before, and he'd meant it. But standing here, this close, with her eyes on his face and the lamplight between them, the practical version felt dishonest. "Because you matter," he said, plain as he could make it. "Not the case, not the land. You." He held her gaze. "I've been watching you for 3 days, and I see a woman who has been handed nothing but wrong and kept herself standing anyway. And I cannot. I am not capable of standing to one side and watching someone like that get swallowed up by a man like Warren Kent." He stopped. "That's why." She looked at him. For a long time she just looked at him. "That's a lot to say to someone you met in a road 3 days ago," she said finally. Her voice was not quite steady. "I know," he said. "Most men don't say things like that. Most men aren't watching a woman stand at a fence line staring down 3 hired riders by herself," he said. "James Finch told me, when they backed their horses up." Something crossed her face, an involuntary flicker of something almost like humor, almost like pride, gone before it could settle. "They were in my way," she said. "They were," he agreed. The humor faded. She looked at him, and the rawness was back. That open, unguarded place underneath everything she'd built to survive the last 7 weeks. "If I stay," she said. "If I give the testimony, if we fight this and it goes the way it should, I still have to go back to Redstone, to that property, to the place where Daniel died and Warren told his story and everyone believed it." She searched his face. "I don't know if I can go back to that alone." "Then don't go alone," Grant said. The words were out before he'd fully constructed them, but he found, standing there, that he didn't want to take them back. Her lips parted slightly. "Grant." "I'm not saying anything that can't wait," he said quickly. "Pruitt's coming tomorrow. Warren's still a problem. There are 20 things that need handling before anything else." He held her gaze. "But I'm saying it's a possibility, that's all. That it's a possibility I'd be willing to think about." She stared at him. From Hope's room, the evening song started up again. Nora looked toward the sound. Her face did something complicated and quiet and entirely her own. "She does that every night?" Nora asked. "Every night since Martha died," he said. "I think she sings herself to sleep so the house doesn't feel too quiet." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Does it work?" He thought about it honestly. "It used to make it worse," he said. "Lately it's been better." She nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what he meant. She turned back to the table and sat down. She opened her hands flat on the surface, looked at them, then looked up. "I'll give the testimony," she said. "Tell Pruitt I'll be ready." "All right." "And—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "The other thing you said." "Yes." "I'm not—" She took a breath. "I'm not ready to think about the other thing yet." "I know," he said. "But I'm not saying no." He looked at her for a moment. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." He was banking the fire for the night when he heard the knock. Not at the front door, the back. 3 sharp raps, fast. The knock of someone who didn't want to be seen. He picked up his gun and went to the door and opened it. It was Roy Summers. Roy looked terrible. He was sweating through his collar, and his eyes had the look of a man who had been arguing with himself all day and had finally, exhausted, landed on a side. "Roy," Grant said. "I need to tell you something," Roy said. "Something I should have said this afternoon at the courthouse and didn't because I was afraid." He swallowed hard. "It's about the night Daniel Hale died. I know something. Something Warren doesn't know I know." Grant stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Roy came in, and what he said next changed everything. Roy Summers sat down at Grant's kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface, like he needed to feel something solid under him before he could say what he'd come to say. Nora had come out of the spare room when she heard the back door. She stood near the hallway now, still and watchful, and when she saw Roy, her face went careful in the way it went careful when something important was about to happen, and she wasn't sure yet whether it would land for her or against her. Roy looked at her. He had the expression of a man who has been carrying guilt for long enough that the weight of it has started to show in his posture. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "I owe you an apology before I say anything else." She said nothing, waited. "I've been letting other people do my thinking for me on this matter," he said. That's not who I want to be." He turned his hat in his hands. "I've known Warren Kent a long time. Not well, but enough to know the kind of man he is. And I told myself it wasn't my business. That's what I told myself. Roy, Grant said, what do you know? Roy set his hat on the table. 2 years ago, he said, before Daniel Hale died, Warren came to me. He looked up. He wanted me to witness a document, a will. He said it was Daniel's, that Daniel had drawn it up and wanted it witnessed by someone outside the county. The room went completely still. I read it, Roy said. I'm not a lawyer, but I can read. It left the Hale property to Warren in the event of Daniel's death. No conditions. And the date on it? He stopped, swallowed. The date was 6 months before Daniel actually died. Nora's hand went to the back of the chair beside her. She gripped it. Did you sign it? Grant asked. No. Roy shook his head hard. I told Warren I needed to think about it. He told me to think fast. I never signed it. But I also never said anything about it. And when Daniel died and Warren started making noise about the property, I told myself it was none of my affair. He looked at Nora directly. Your husband was already dead. I thought whatever Warren was doing, it was a legal matter, not a... He stopped. But then tonight, I heard what happened. The man he sent to your house. What he said to you in the road. Roy's jaw tightened. And I understood that I'd been letting a man get away with something because speaking up was inconvenient for me. Grant looked at him for a long moment. That will Warren showed you, he said. Could you identify it again? Testify to what was on it, what the date was, that Warren asked you to sign it before Daniel died? Yes, Roy said. Every word of it. You understand what that means, Grant said. That's not Daniel changing his will. That's Warren preparing a document before his brother's death and trying to get it witnessed. That's premeditation, Roy. That's not a property dispute. Roy looked at the table. I know what it is, he said quietly. Did Warren push Daniel? Nora asked. Her voice was so controlled, it barely sounded like a question, but her knuckles on the chair back were white. Roy looked at her. I don't know, he said. I don't know what happened that night. I only know what I saw 2 years before it. He paused. But a man who makes out a will in anticipation of his brother's death is a man who has thought about that death a good long time before it happens. The kitchen was silent for a moment, except for the low sound of the fire in the stove. Nora let go of the chair. She turned and walked to the window and stood there with her back to both of them, and Grant could see the line of her shoulders, the way they rose once, sharply, and then came back down, the only sign she gave. Will you tell this to Judge Pruitt? Grant asked Roy. That's why I'm here, Roy said. Yes, I'll tell him everything. Grant sent Roy home just before midnight, with instructions to be at the courthouse at 9 in the morning, and to say nothing to anyone between now and then. Roy nodded, picked up his hat, and paused at the door. I should have done this sooner, he said. You're doing it now, Grant said. Roy left. Grant turned around. Nora was back at the table. She'd sat down at some point while he was talking to Roy, and she had her hands folded in front of her, and she was looking at them with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the guarded composure, not the tightly managed calm. Something older than both of those. Something that had been sitting underneath everything for a very long time, and had just been given permission to surface. He planned it, she said. We don't know that for certain. I know it. She looked up. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. I've known it since the night it happened. I just couldn't prove it, and I couldn't say it out loud because the moment I said it, I became a woman accusing a man with money and lawyers and a judge in his pocket. She pressed her lips together. But I knew. The way Daniel fell, the angle of it, The way Warren appeared out of nowhere before I'd even screamed for help. He was already there. She looked at Grant. He was already there. Grant sat down across from her. "Tomorrow," he said, "you tell Pruitt exactly what you just told me. All of it. Everything you saw, everything you know, the timeline, Warren's behavior afterward. Roy's testimony establishes the premeditation. Yours establishes the night." He held her gaze. Together, they build something Warren cannot knock down with a hired lawyer. She was quiet for a moment. What if Warren runs before Pruitt can issue a subpoena? "Pruitt wired the territorial marshal this afternoon," Grant said. "I asked him to. Warren's name is on a watch list at every road out of the county." He paused. "He doesn't know that yet." Something moved across her face. "You thought of that before I did." "I've been thinking about it since I left Pruitt's this morning." He looked at her. "I had a long ride." She studied him. The lamplight was low and warm, and she looked at him the way she'd been looking at him more often in the last 24 hours. Like she was revising something. Like the version of him she'd been carefully maintaining was being replaced, whether she'd planned for it or not, by something more accurate and considerably more dangerous to her composure. "Go to sleep," he said. "You need to be sharp tomorrow." "I'm not tired." "You've been running for 7 weeks," he said. "You're tired. You just stopped feeling it somewhere around the 4th week." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him with an expression that was almost exasperated and almost fond, and entirely unwilling to confirm either. "Good night, Grant," she said. "Good night, Nora." She went to the spare room. He heard the door close. He sat at the table for a while longer in the dark and the quiet, turning everything over one more time, checking it the way you check the gate before a storm. Every latch, every hinge, every point where something could come loose. Then he went to bed. For the first time in 2 years, he slept straight through until morning. Pruitt arrived at 8:45, which told Grant something about how seriously the man was taking it. He came alone, no clerk, no deputy, which told Grant something else. This was not a formal proceeding, not yet. This was a judge who wanted to hear everything before he decided what the formal proceeding would look like. Nora was already dressed and at the table when Pruitt knocked. She stood when he came in and shook his hand and looked him in the eye without flinching. And Grant watched Pruitt take her measure the way he measured everyone. Quickly, quietly, without much expression. And whatever he concluded, he sat down and took out his notebook and said simply, "Tell me everything, Mrs. Hale, from the beginning." She did. She was precise. She was clear. She did not embellish and she did not minimize, and she did not look to Grant for support even once, though he sat in the corner of the room and said nothing. She talked for 40 minutes straight. Daniel, the land, the drinking, Warren's visits, the night on the porch, what she had seen and what she had not seen, and what she had understood only in the weeks afterward when the pieces settled into their real shape. When she finished, Pruitt wrote for another 2 minutes without looking up. Then he looked up. "You understand that your testimony, combined with what Roy Summers has indicated he will say, constitutes grounds for a criminal inquiry into Warren Kent, not just a property challenge." "Yes," she said. "You understand that a criminal inquiry means this goes beyond the land. Warren Kent could be charged with conspiracy to defraud, potentially more. It will be a long process. It will require you to return to Redstone County to testify before a properly convened court." "I understand." "You're prepared for that?" "I have been prepared for that since the night my husband died," she said. "I just didn't have anyone willing to stand in front of it with me." Pruitt looked at Grant briefly. Grant looked at the table. "Roy Summers will be here at 9, Grant said. Pruitt checked his watch. It was 8:58. At 9 o'clock exactly, Roy Summers knocked on the front door. Roy's testimony took 25 minutes. He was less composed than Nora, but more thorough than Grant had expected. He had clearly spent the night going over it, sharpening the details, making sure he had the sequence right. The date on the will, the exact language Warren had used when he asked Roy to sign it, the fact that he had refused, the fact that Warren had never mentioned it again after Roy said no. Pruitt wrote everything down. When Roy finished, Pruitt sat back and looked at his notes for a long time. "I'm issuing 2 orders this morning," he said finally. "The first vacates all documents originating from Judge Carver's court as they pertain to the Hale property and Mrs. Hale's person. The property freeze is lifted. The arrest inquiry is closed." He looked at Nora. "You are not a fugitive, Mrs. Hale. You never were. You were the victim of a fraudulent legal proceeding." Nora's breath came out in a long, slow exhale. She said nothing. She just sat very still and let it land. "The second order," Pruitt continued, "opens a formal criminal inquiry into Warren Kent on grounds of conspiracy to defraud and potential complicity in the death of Daniel Hale. I will be requesting the Territorial Marshal's assistance in ensuring Mr. Kent is available for questioning." He paused. "I expect that request will be honored before noon." He stood up, closed his notebook. "Mrs. Hale," he said, not unkindly, "I'm sorry this was not handled correctly from the start. It should have been." Nora looked up at him. "No," she said. "It shouldn't have had to be handled at all." Pruitt looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, the way men nod when they have been corrected accurately. "No," he said. "It shouldn't have." He left. Roy Summers sat at the table for a moment after the door closed. He looked like a man who had just put down something he'd been carrying for a long time, and was surprised to find his arms didn't know what to do with themselves. "I'm sorry," he said to Nora. Not elaborate, just the 2 words. "I know," she said. He left too, and then it was just Grant and Nora in the kitchen, with the morning light coming through the windows, and Hope singing something in the back room that was almost recognizable as a real song for the first time. They heard about Warren Kent's arrest just before noon. James Finch rode over to tell them. His mother had sent him, because Ada Finch had apparently decided in the last 72 hours that she had a stake in this outcome and intended to stay informed. The Territorial Marshal had arrived in Harlan Creek at 10 o'clock with Pruitt's order. Warren Kent had been in the saloon, already drinking, which James relayed with a kind of grim satisfaction. He had not gone quietly. He had said things about Grant, about Nora, about the law, about the territory, that James declined to repeat in full, though his expression suggested they had been impressive in their viciousness. Deke Farrow had been gone before the marshal arrived. Nobody had seen him leave. "What about the other men?" Grant asked. "Scattered," James said. "Hired riders don't stick around when the man paying them is in handcuffs." Grant nodded. "Tell your mother thank you. Tell her she's welcome to supper any evening she chooses." James grinned, the first easy expression Grant had seen from anyone in the better part of a week, and rode out. Grant turned around. Nora was in the doorway. She had heard all of it. She stood very still with one hand on the doorframe, and she was looking at the road where James had disappeared, and her face had the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for something for so long that when it finally happens, the feeling is not what they expected. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something quieter than either of those. Something that felt more like the first full breath after a very long time of breathing shallow. "It's over," Grant said. She looked at him. "The warrant's over," she said. "The inquiry is just starting." "I know, but the running is over." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "The running is over." Hope came through the door between them, ducking under Nora's arm without asking permission, the way she had started doing in the last 2 days, as if she had always done it. "James said they arrested him," Hope announced. "He did," Grant said. "Good." She said it with the clean, uncomplicated certainty of a child who has not yet learned to perform ambivalence about things she actually thinks are straightforward. "He was mean and he was wrong, and now he has to answer for it." She looked up at Nora. "That's how it works. Papa says so." Nora looked down at her. That unguarded thing moved across her face again, the thing she had been losing the battle to control more and more often in the last 3 days. She put her hand briefly on top of Hope's head. Just briefly, just the lightest touch. "Your papa's right," she said. Hope leaned into the touch without making anything of it. Grant watched this happen and said nothing. They were on the porch that evening, the 3 of them, which had somehow become the natural shape of evenings on this property, in a way that none of them had planned and none of them had decided to comment on, when Nora said it. "I have to go back to Redstone." Grant looked at her. "I know," he said. "The inquiry. The property. There are things I have to settle in person." She looked at her hands. "I've been avoiding thinking about what that looks like. Going back to that land. Walking that ground again." She paused. "But it's mine. And I'm not going to let Warren Kent have it even from inside a jail cell." "No," Grant said. "You're not." Hope was sitting on the step below them, running a stick through the dust in the way children do when they're listening to adults talk and pretending they're not. "When are you going?" Hope asked. "I don't know yet," Nora said. "Pruitt will need me within the week, I expect." Hope traced a slow circle in the dust. "And then what?" She looked up. "Do you come back?" The question landed in the evening air with a complete directness that only children are capable of. No cushioning, no social management, just the thing itself, asked plainly. Nora looked at Hope for a moment. Then she looked at Grant. He looked back at her. He didn't say anything to rescue her from the question or to redirect it. He thought she deserved to answer it honestly, and he thought he deserved to hear it. She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to," she said. If that's something that makes sense. When everything's settled." She paused. "If the offer's still open." "The offer's still open," Grant said. He said it simply, the way he said things when he meant them completely and didn't feel the need to add anything around them. Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at Hope. "Would that be all right with you?" she asked. "Me coming back?" Hope considered this with the gravity of someone weighing a serious matter. "You put lavender in the spare room," she said. "I did," Nora said. "And you don't burn the bottoms of the eggs." "I don't." Hope nodded slowly. "Then yes," she said. "I think you should come back." Nora made a sound that was almost a laugh, brief and genuine and surprised, the kind of sound that gets past you before you can decide to allow it. "All right," she said softly. "Then I'll come back." She left 3 mornings later. Her wagon was repaired. Her horses, a pair that Grant had sourced from Ben Alcott in lieu of the ones Deke Farrow had taken, were solid animals, well-tempered, suited to the road. He had loaded the wagon the night before with provisions for the journey, checked every bolt and brace on the axle himself, and said nothing about any of it when she came out in the morning. She saw what he'd done. She didn't say anything about it either. Hope was up at sunrise, which she did not do for ordinary mornings. She stood on the porch in her nightgown, with her arms crossed, and watched Grant help Nora with the final rigging of the horses, with an expression that was trying very hard to be brave and not entirely succeeding. When Nora climbed up onto the wagon seat, Hope came down off the porch. "I have something for you," she said. She held up a small square of cloth. It was pale yellow, cut from something Grant didn't immediately recognize, with a careful, uneven stitch running along the edges. A handkerchief, more or less, in the approximate shape of one. "I made it this morning," Hope said. "The sewing's not perfect." "It's perfect," Nora said. "It's not, but it's mine, and I want you to have it." Hope held it up until Nora took it. "So you remember where to come back to." Nora held the small square of cloth in her hand and looked at it, and then looked at Hope, and did not trust herself to say anything elaborate. "I remember," she said. "I won't forget." She gathered the reins. Grant was standing at the wheel. He looked up at her, and she looked down at him, and between them was everything that had been said and everything that hadn't, and the clear, shared understanding that there was time for all of it, that this was not an ending, it was an intermission, and they both knew the difference. "Ride straight through Millfield," he said. "Don't stop in Kellerton. Go around. Pruitt will have a man waiting for you at the county line." "I know," she said. "If anything feels wrong—" "Grant." She said his name the way she'd learned to say it, the way that meant she'd heard him, and she was all right, and he could stop now. "I know." He nodded. He stepped back. She looked at him one more time. Just a look. But it held everything in it that two people can put into a look when they have run out of reasons to pretend they don't mean it. "I'll be back inside of 2 weeks," she said. "I'll be here," he said. She clicked her tongue to the horses, and they moved out of the yard at an easy walk. And Grant stood where he was and watched her go, and did not move until the wagon had rounded the bend in the road and disappeared. Hope came and stood beside him. She slid her hand into his without looking at him. He closed his fingers around hers. They stood there together in the summer morning, the man who had spent 2 years learning to survive something, and the child who had been singing herself to sleep in an empty house, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the moment wasn't already saying for them. She was back in 11 days. She came in the afternoon, no warning, no letter ahead of her, and Grant was in the barn and didn't hear the wagon until Hope screamed from the porch, which was the kind of scream that contained no fear at all and a great deal of something else entirely. He came out of the barn and stopped in the yard. Nora was climbing down from the wagon seat, and Hope was already there, grabbing at her sleeve with both hands, talking at a pace that made the words indistinguishable from each other. Nora looked up from Hope and found Grant across the yard. Her face was different. Not the guarded, careful face from the road. Not the composed, managed face of the first days. Her face was open, settled, the face of a woman who had walked back into the place that had taken everything from her and walked back out with what was hers, and who now knew, in the deep, unshakable way that you can only know something after you've been tested against it, exactly who she was. Grant crossed the yard. He stopped in front of her. "How did it go?" he asked. "The inquiry's opened," she said. "Warren's being held pending full investigation. His lawyers showed up, but Pruitt was ready for them." She paused. "The property's mine, officially, legally. Nobody can touch it." He looked at her. "You all right?" She considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things. "I went to the porch," she said, "where it happened. I stood there for a while." She held his gaze. "And then I walked inside, into my house, and I thought about what I want to do with it." A pause. "I haven't decided yet." "You've got time," he said. "I do." She looked at him steadily.
I also thought about what I want to do next. After.
And? She glanced at Hope, who had pressed herself against Nora's side and was making no effort whatsoever to hide the fact that she was listening to every word. I thought, Nora said carefully, that I might come back to Harlan Creek for a while. See how things settle. How long a while? Grant asked. She looked at him. Something in her face was warm and direct and entirely decided. As long as it takes, she said, for things to settle properly. That could be a long time, Grant said. It could be, she agreed. He nodded slowly. I'll put your things in the spare room, he said. The one that smells like cedar, Hope said immediately. It smells like lavender now, Nora said. I put some in last time. Hope beamed. Grant looked at Nora, and Nora looked at Grant. And between them, in the afternoon light, in the yard of the house he had built with his hands and his grief and his determination to keep standing, something settled. Not dramatically, not with declaration, the way real things settle. Quietly, permanently, and with the particular solidity of things that have been earned. He picked up her bag from the wagon. She walked beside him toward the door. Hope ran ahead of them both, already talking about supper, already planning something, already 3 steps into the next chapter of a life that had, without anyone quite deciding it, become large enough for all 3 of them. And Grant McCoy, who had buried one woman and promised himself he would never open that door again, opened the door and held it for Nora Hale to walk through first. Some promises, it turned out, were made to be kept, and some were made to be outlived by something better. This was the second kind.